Good evening, everyone. We're going to make a start. Sorry to interrupt everyone's conversations. We're going to put hands up in a minute. We're streaming?
Yeah.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time this evening and being here for our final Sacre meeting of the year. We would just begin with apologies, then I'll do welcomes, because there's a couple of new faces who've joined our wonderful group. So, Luciani, apologies, please.
Apologies from John Sutton, Julie Easton, and Samantha Lawless.
Thank you. And we've got Philip and Katie who have joined us online. We're going to try and keep an eye on the chat and the screen, so if you do have any questions, just if you do hands up function. Also, we've got a couple of new members of Group D, so I'll allow Steve and Alison to introduce themselves. You're very welcome. So, Steve.
Stephen Newton, as you say, member of Woking Borough Council, and I'm a ward member for Maiden Early and Whitegates.
Alison Swaddle, member of Woking Borough Council. I represent Bullmush and Coronation in Woodley.
Thank you both. You're very welcome and welcome to the group. So, of course, means I think Alex has left the group and also Jordan as well. So we just is it all right if we just minute our thanks to both of their contributions over the last year to the Sacre. Item 2, minutes from the previous meeting.
Shahid's just come.
Hi, Shahid. So our last normal Sacre was in March. I think maybe we take those minutes first, and then we can have a look at the agreed syllabus conference meetings. That's right. And then Emily, if you just jump in. The minutes of the meeting that was held in March are in the agenda pack, and they got sent out as well. So I hope people had an opportunity to have a look at them and have a read. Are there any amendments anybody would like to raise? Can I have somebody to propose that the minutes were an accurate record of our meeting? Thank you, Beth. And to second them, Shahid. Thank you, Shahid. And then the second set of minutes we need to approve are from the agreed syllabus conference from the 12th of May, so last month. And again, I hope people have had an opportunity to have a read of them. And are there any amendments or questions? No? Can somebody around the room who's happy to propose a true accurate record of our meeting in May? Thank you, Beth. And a second? Nigel, thank you. So those are approved as well. Luciani? Sorry, Emily.
Would it be helpful if I address some of the matters arising from the minutes, Stephen?
I think there's a few people have come in as well asking about the syllabus. And
yes, so I'll do that one first. So obviously our last ASC meeting, we agreed some changes to the syllabus. I have to apologise, I have been so busy since that meeting. I haven't finished the process of going through the document and making those changes that were agreed. It might initially seem like a very quick document, but when you actually go through and make sure you've got everything exactly as was agreed and check for any typos and all of that, it's actually a reasonably time-consuming job. So I've started the job and I'm aiming to finish it this week. When I have finished it, I will send it to all of you, or ask Luciani to send it to you, and I'll also share it with schools with the proviso that it hasn't yet been formally adopted by Woking Borough Council. It is scheduled to be on the agenda of a full council meeting on the 31st of July. So obviously we're assuming that it will be adopted at that meeting. And then the process after that will be I will send it to our design team to get it formatted. And then the final version will be shared with schools. So that's where we are with the syllabus.
Just to let you know that Bracknell Council desperately wants to have a copy, and I am hoping the same will be the case for various others, so I'm very happy that we can have it this week because people want it. We are popular.
From Bracknell that they are very keen to have a copy, so I will share it with them as well this week.
And Shira, do you know, you said some of the other LAs are quite keen to have it. Have they sort of said to you actually they're quite keen to have it as well?
I have no links to Slough at the moment. We're working on getting a due on to Slough. Reading, I can only assume that they will want it because I know that they were just very, very friendly about the need for change. West Berks, I don't know, but my feeling is that once it's clear that Bracknell is going to be looking at it and Reading's going to be looking at it, there'll be a kind of group sort of, yeah, that's the hope. Oh, Maidenhead need to check that. They've got a meeting on the 24th of June. I'd actually, so I'll tell Dale now that, because it's kind of difficult, like, until we have a copy of the working syllabus. So as soon as possible, what I wanted to say is, here, we've got a new syllabus. Take a look. We've done all the work. And, they're meeting on the 24th of June. So the sooner that we get that, it's quite urgent, actually, isn't it? Yeah.
Can we send it to all the other authorities? Even if they haven't asked for it yet?
I think so. I think we've worked quite hard on it, and I think it addresses, hopefully, all of the concerns, and it'll be good to maybe have another Pan Berkshire one.
I was going to say, if people decide to take on, you might get into a Pan Berkshire document via the back door.
Thank you.
Linda.
Oh, sorry, Linda.
I just asked, what's the impact for schools? Because obviously they're supposed to be planning with it and that already.
Yeah, really good question. So we did discuss that at the previous meeting because that was a concern, I think, across the board. And what the local authority have said is that there'll be a slightly longer implementation period. So it'll be like a year and a term, I think is the ideal. So with a view to launch and share it with schools officially in September, and then with a view that it'll be January 27 or when it will go live. Is that correct, Emily? Yeah. Any other matters arising, Emily, you want to...
So at our March meeting, there was an action for me relating to our new constitution. So there was a discussion about, in section 18, which is the Code of Conduct section, it mentions the word offensive in relation to social media communication, basically all communication that happens outside Sacre meetings. So what I've printed out, I've gone away and looked at, because Shira was suggesting that the word abusive would be a better word than offensive, because Shira's explanation for that was that someone can take something as offensive when it wasn't intended to be, whereas abusive suggests that there was an intent to be insulting or derogatory. So my action was to take that back and look at the WBC constitution, because we come under that as the Sacre, so it makes sense for our constitution to be in line with that, and also to check with our legal team what their advice was. So I've done both of those things. The Wokingham Borough Code of Conduct uses both words, abusive and offensive, and it uses them interchangeably as if they really mean the same thing. And when I looked up the definition of abusive, the dictionary definition, it says using rude and offensive words. So it seems that I take Shira's point, I understand the point Shira was making, but it seems they are used interchangeably. So I consulted a legal colleague, and her advice was to reflect the Wokingham Borough Constitution and use both words. So what you've got printed out, and apologies this wasn't ready for the agenda pack, but I've just printed out the first part of the Code of Conduct, So section 18.1, I've made no changes, it's exactly the same as it was. Section 18.2 is exactly the same. Section 18.3, in the second paragraph, I've simply, yes, it's not in the agenda pack, sorry Shira, it's an additional handout that was available. Thank you, Linda. I've simply added in the word abusive, so we've got offensive and abusive there. And something quite helpful, Shira, that you might be particularly interested to see, in the Wokingham Borough Constitution, it talks about offensive. What we mean by offensive is criticism which crosses the line of what a reasonable person would find acceptable. So I don't know if that's helpful to you, but it says that about what they mean by offensive. So that's around the offensive, abusive issue. You'll see that at the bottom of this handout, there's some other text in bold font. And that reflects, when my legal team colleague got back to me about this, she said, having looked at the Wokingham Borough Code of Conduct, she would suggest that we add in a note to our Code of Conduct saying that when members are talking or posting or writing outside Sacre meetings about matters that relate to the work of the Sacre, it would be good for them to make it clear that they're expressing their personal views if they're not views that have been agreed by our Sacre, and that we give some examples of the kind of communication that wouldn't be acceptable. So I've just added in that paragraph that says, when expressing views that relate to the work of the Sacre or ASC, on social media, in written communication or in any public forum, Sacre members must make it clear that their views are their own and not those of the Sacre, ASC or Wokingham Borough Council. And then there's a couple of bullet points below that about what, sorry, I've just realised I've made an error because I've copied this from the Wokingham Conduct, which talks about employees. Obviously, I need to change that to Sacre members. So any communications that Sacre members, it should say, make in a personal capacity through social media or any other public forum must not bring the local authority into disrepute, for example, by making defamatory comments about individuals or the council, or posting links to inappropriate content, or share anything that could be considered discriminatory against or bullying or harassment of any individual, for example, offensive or derogatory comments relating to sex, gender reassignment, race, disability, sexual orientation, religion or belief or age. So I'm wondering whether people are happy for me to make those changes to the Constitution, which would then also go to that council meeting at the end of July for adoption by the council.
What's the process, Emily? Do we need to vote on it?
So I think when we voted last time, we did it on an individual basis, didn't we? So members just raising their hands to show if they...
Before we vote, are there any questions? Or Shira?
I would still prefer if we just keep using the word abusive instead of offensive, because I know that offence has been weaponised, and who finds something reasonable depends on who's doing the finding. There have been, for example, women who have been called offensive or engaged in hate speech. Remember the LGBT Alliance almost had their charitable status questioned by people who view them as a hate group for simply being who they are. And I'm very nervous about the weaponization of offence to silence people who may actually be quite vulnerable and not have political power, so that they don't get to decide what's reasonable. I think it's quite a dangerous thing to play with, the word offensive. I know of cases legally where it has been weaponized, where people have had to go to court, have lost their jobs, and had to fight to get their jobs back. The Maya Forstater case comes to mind. This is real stuff. The word offensive it would be much better if you just use if the word, because when you use offensive and abusive next to each other, you're implying that they mean different things. Whereas if you're defining offensive as being abusive, then why would you need to say offensive or abusive? If they mean the same thing, and what you mean by offensive is abusive, then just say abusive. And then you avoid the risk of it being weaponized. And I'm sorry for appearing to be a bit sort of paranoid, but I know people who have been affected by this sort of thing, and it's very, very nasty when it happens to you.
And it's just a thought with the word offensive. We would not want that, because if, say, for example, sometimes maybe somebody might make a comment out of ignorance or about not understanding, that's surely more offensive than abusive, and therefore that person should be educated.
Yes. Rather than...
But I'm saying that would come under offensive, though, as opposed to... I do hear what you're saying, as opposed to abusive, because abusive implies intent.
If someone says something offensive in that way, you can have a conversation with them. You don't need to come down on them with like a sort of with a sledgehammer. So that wouldn't be need to be a sort of violation. People say things all the time that I find offensive. I mean, people call Judaism a worldview. Okay, but I don't think people should be struck off a Sacre for saying that.
Yeah, and I would hope that, I mean, I won't be here, but I would hope that if somebody did do something that's offensive, I'm sure Emily and the local authority wouldn't all be like, oh, you're off the Sacre because somebody made an ignorant comment or something. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the issue that's been raised, and I get that. I was just wondering, in terms of process, if somebody did have a complaint or a grievance that they were using this to bring up, would that go to the Council Standards Committee, or where would it go for adjudication? Because I get what you're saying about concerns about who might be listening and hearing on it and making the decision, but I'm just thinking that if it is the Council Standards Committee, then they would take all of that into account. And so I get the legal bit is about a reasonable person, but if those reasonable people are the Standards Committee, then I think that would actually satisfy, because they would be aware of what you're talking about, and they would have that thoughts in their mind when they're making that ruling.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about legal cases, Shira, because the advice I had from my legal colleague was that in terms of legality, it makes no difference which word you use. And she did also say that it's always open to interpretation, because like Steve says, if there is an issue under the Code of Conduct, it would be interpreted by a committee or a person who the issue is taken to, and so they would take all the factors into account and interpret it.
I get what you're saying, but I know of cases, I don't want to say details of things, we're on a meeting that's being recorded, but I have personally experienced where people have been given incorrect legal advice, that certain things were not allowed when they were allowed. I've personally experienced this myself, because people often interpret the law to be what they want it to mean rather than what it does mean, and it all depends on who has loudest voice. I have grown over the last few years to be much more cynical about assuming that people can necessarily always be assumed that they will make the right judgments on things, because I've seen so many cases of bad judgment, and I'd rather play it safe because of my personal experience of this. I've been personally affected by this in situations that I'd rather not give the detail of.
As chairman of the Standards Committee, can I say that members don't make decisions without taking legal advice from very well qualified lawyers? I'm content that offensive and that both words are interchangeable, but both mean different to different people. I've been abused and offended, and they're very, very different things, and I think we need to keep both words.
I very much back your point of view there, because different people, and also with the council interchanging the words, I think we cover all eventualities by using both words. That's what I would say.
I think if we...
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with that because I think I do have confidence in the process and the individuals that would carry it out. I think from trying to draw this to a conclusion, subject to that change that's been suggested by Emily, I would like to propose this as it stands so we can move this on to a vote, hopefully.
So, because we voted previously one person, one vote, we do a show of hands of those who accept the Constitution as it is with that amendment of changing from to Sacre members of employees, and then should we not have sufficient people, then we can have a conversation about what change. So if those of you online, if you vote for the approval, just so we pick a show of hands, then around the room, those in favour. Have you got the numbers?
I don't need the numbers, that clear majority.
Okay, so it's the majority. Do you want any abstentions and noes?
I can make a note if you want.
I think just for the purpose of minutes. ABQ,
Were you abstaining?
abstentions, so 1, and noes, 1 no. So that passes with the majority. Thank you. Emily, do you want to go through the review of the syllabus process as AAB? Yep.
Could I do that one now?
Yeah.
So on our March meeting, we had on the agenda an item that we decided to postpone, and that was to have a discussion to reflect on the process of developing the Berkshire syllabus. And we postponed it, obviously, because we hadn't finished working on the syllabus. I haven't put that on the agenda for the meeting today because I wanted to check with Sacre members how they wanted to proceed with that. And I also had a discussion about it with my senior colleague Ming, who came to one of our meetings, and he's very supportive of helping us to have that review. So there's a couple of options of how we could take that forward. We can absolutely discuss that in a Sacre meeting. We could put that on the agenda for our autumn term meeting. Or we could do both these things. Another option, which Ming is very happy to support, is that we set up a task and finish group, which would include some members of the Sacre, who we could nominate today, who would be part of a group to look in depth at how the syllabus was developed, what went well, what didn't go well, what we would like it to look like in 5 years' time when we go through the process again. So yeah, 2 options, and we could do both or one of them. So have the discussion in a meeting to look back at the process and think about how we'd like it to be different going forward, or be part of a task and finish group looking at that. Just wondered what people think.
So open the floor to any questions or oppositions, Stephen?
Thank you. That's an interesting idea. I think based upon the importance of this and the impacts into the schools and also the interests of the religious groups, I'm actually quite in favour of it being discussed in this meeting, but also having a task and finish group. And if that's agreed, what I was going to suggest was that we have at least one representative from each of the groups on the task and finish group to make sure that all of the different elements are represented. There can be more than one if needs be, but we don't want it to be massive, obviously, because it's just a committee. But then each group would know who the representative was, and they could feed through what they want to through their representative.
Sorry, what is a task and finish group?
So it's a small group of individuals who are set up for a time-limited period to investigate a specific issue and come up with recommendations. So it wouldn't be like an ongoing committee, it would be set up for a period of months, let's say, to do a very specific job, which would be to review, in this case, how the syllabus was developed and recommend what the process should look like next time we do it.
I'm just thinking, top of what Stephen just saying, that do we need to have both? I think because of the importance of this, right, I would prefer representation for everyone. So I discuss it in the committee, because discussing in the committee and having a task force, I can see a lot of the people here, but they will be on the task force anyway. But I think being discussed in the committee, well, I think everybody will get to hear all the arguments, pro and con. I think that probably will be a better outcome, in my personal view, rather than the task force. But I'll leave it to the members.
I agree with Shahid, as we've all been involved in much of the process, not all of it, because the hub did quite a lot of the work. I think we should all put our penneth in to how we go forward, and look at the options that are available to us and make the best option for us. That may be a hub, or it may be that we stand alone and work on a syllabus on our own.
I think we've got two things that are happening here. One is a review of the process, and then there's thinking about what we're going to do going forward. And it would seem to me that reviewing the process is where you might want a smaller group to go through and consider in detail what happened. That would report back to Sacre, and then all of us would be involved in thinking through what we would like to change. I think the smaller group establishing the timelines, what happened, who did what, where the difficulties were, and producing something that is definitive for people to discuss, that we're all happy with, would be an easier way of moving to a conclusion than having something in the wider area. Otherwise, who is going to come up and say, this is what happened? We're not going to be able to manage that in a group this large.
I'm imagining that if there were a small group, a lot of this would be emails back and forth and phone conversations and documents that are being revised and passed, and they wouldn't, and that's the sort of thing that takes place over time, where people have bits of free time during the week, and would be very difficult to do in a Sacre meeting, because we're talking about where there actually would have to be time invested, right, into sort of building documents. The important thing is that then that we make sure we're not sidelining important voices, because again, Group A is very diverse, right? So you can't assume that anybody from any group is represented, particularly Group A. The other groups I think are more homogenous, but Group A is basically like everyone else. So we need to be careful there. Maybe you need 2 people from Group A, possibly,
Just a couple of Sarah, just again things for people to reflect upon is, firstly, there is that time. I agree with what you're saying, and you are all volunteers, and time's precious. This is obviously an important piece of work. And the second thing, there were challenges with the syllabus, and they were addressed in an appropriate way. But also, I think we just need to reflect upon, for some of us, there was a lot of the syllabus actually we were quite happy with as well. And I think I don't want to lose that within all of this sort of review as well. I think it's just something to keep in mind. Sarah?
I was going to say, not being involved in one, except being around here, then I think having one person from each group is good. It keeps it small. It means those people can communicate with the other people in the group. I'm thinking of what I do at school. Whenever we've got a big change coming on, we get a small group of people, get them to communicate with anyone that's, interested party in it, and they bring that to the meeting. And then you give recommendations to the bigger group and say, this is what we found, this is our findings. And then you can come up with, if necessary, that could be one of the remits, with some suggestions. Not this is what you should do, but these are the suggestions. This is the remit, this is the suggestions of ways forward so that this doesn't happen. And you can come up with as many ideas as you want, and then just give people the chance to think about it. You've done all the hard work for them.
Yeah. In that case, I'm thinking again of the way in which the Jews across Berkshire work together, and then I tended to be the spokesperson for them, but I would sort of bounce things off the others. The important thing is that we can communicate with each other. So what often happens with the agendas, they get sent out BCC, And I think that in order to make that sort of thing work, we need to all agree, GDPR, that we are happy for in our groups to share email addresses, etc., across each other, so that whoever is sort of the lead for that group can then say, okay, this is what we discussed, what do you guys think? And then you actually, and as long as that's happening, then the consultation actually can be very effective and no one will feel sidelined.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, my apologies. I hadn't realised that not everybody may have been on task and finish groups, so my apologies for that. In terms of what's already been said, task and finish groups tend to be very specific, and they're not decision-making bodies. They are fact-finding, they're collating information impartially, so they're not trying to make an opinion on it, they're just trying to collate facts. And then they would make from those facts a series of recommendations, but the Sacre would then be the decision-making body, and there can be discussion at that, and the recommendations can be changed, they don't need to be followed, other recommendations can come out as well. But it's just one of the advantages of having a smaller group doing this is it's much easier to collate diaries and find time to do that. But it's certainly not intended to exclude anybody or for anybody to feel sidelined or not able to express their opinions or have their voice. So that's why I think that would be easier to work in that way on a smaller group with a very defined terms of reference, sorry, struggling my words, so that we all know what they're doing and they stick within that. And also, as I say, there will be no decision-making within that. It's more fact-finding, reporting back, and making recommendations based upon that. Thank you.
Over the years, I've been, part of many tasks and groups, etc. But still, I'm of the opinion that by having tasks or small members, because some of the views will be sidelined, because even within the one group within here, there was an agreement within even the groups as well, with disagreement. So even if you have two representatives, still, all the other views will not be heard. So I'm not personally convinced. I think it would be much better if, even another suggestion is, if we want to review, as you said, there's two things. One is a review of the whole process we went, and the other one is how the future syllabus will look like. Other suggestion could be that we have a specific meeting just to review it, the process. And when everybody's there, all the views could be heard, and that's a time bound as well. We can have 3 hours dedicated to the review. I think that's been more than enough, because we all have been part of the process. We know exactly what went wrong, all the different things we discussed. But if it's a selective group, there will be a selective view of the inner task. It's not going to be a holistic view, because there are other people whose views will not be heard. So by default, some views will be sidelined. So, the way around that would be, yes, incorporate everyone, but actually have one meeting specifically to discuss the review, or to have a meeting discuss what the future syllabus is going to look like. But at least everybody's view will be heard in that.
I just want to support the idea of the task and finish group, that I think that having those representatives, basically it's just bringing together that information, creating some kind of briefing paper where they're kind of just setting out that information that we need as a whole group to kind of inform our discussion. So I think even if it doesn't capture absolutely everything in that discussion in the meeting, I think individuals can bring forward anything they don't feel is captured. But it should be kind of like the high-level themes. It could set out some kind of options as well in terms of different ways of doing it in the future. And it's just, it's just everything all together, trying to be efficient about it. Let's not have too many meetings.
Thank you. I think a task and finish group for looking at the process we've just been through is not the right tool, because only 2 of us and the advisors were involved in it. Either Stephen or myself attended the hub meetings, sometimes neither of us, if we couldn't get there, and those views of what happened at the hub couldn't come from anyone else except the two of us and the RE advisors that we had. There was always an advisor with us. And so a task and finish group isn't what we need to look at the hub bit. To look at the other bit, yes, but not the hub bit.
Beth, that's a really good point. I was sort of envisaging, I guess, that if we had a task and finish group, what they would need to do was to set up a meeting with yourself and or some of the advisors to sort of ask you questions and find out what the process was from you. You might be on the task and finish group yourself, but if you're not, then I assume they would need to talk to you to find out information from you.
I just think we have to be very clear about what it is, because it sounds very to me like it's an investigation.
Yeah.
And that sounds like the process is, and because it feels like from some of the comments it's not a reflection on anyone, but it feels like we're looking for blame. We accept that something has gone wrong possibly, but I'm not so sure that is the way. What are we trying to do? What is the ultimate aim? We're trying to make the process a bit more streamlined and better in the future. Surely that's what we should be looking at.
I was going to say also maybe that you want to highlight the successes and work on those that didn't work so well. So put that within the remit so that you can actually emphasise what did go well. Okay, so it's not just all a blame game.
What do you need from members this evening in terms of...
Yeah,
it's
so
good to sort of, I think, find a bit of a way forward and resolve this and move on with this. So do you want us to vote on sort of that task and finish group, and then you look with a view to set up the new academic year?
Yeah, I guess I need to go back to Ming and let him know if members would like a task and finish group so that he can support taking that forward. Or Sacre might decide it's all going to happen within a Sacre meeting, in which case Ming doesn't need to be involved. But it would be good to get a decision on that, I think.
And in terms of voting, again, do we need to go into groups?
I guess it is...
So defer to our... Well, yeah, Ian, what...
It is a formal decision. I guess we're recommending something to the council, aren't we?
Yeah,
Which probably
the only time you would need to go into a group is at an ASC. So to separate as individual, one member, one vote.
Okay. So if we take that first bit Emily said about having a task and finish group, and if there's a majority of that, then I think that's quite clear. And if not, then we can possibly look at some other options. Shira?
I still think it would be very useful for Group A to have a chat, because part of this is about thinking about, if we did have representative of Group A on this group, what that role that person would be and how comfortable people would feel about somebody playing that role. Because I think that if there were enough comfort with a particular person to take that role, that they would genuinely be consulting and listening and not just sort of pursuing whatever their own, agenda, whatever, then that might sort of allay. I think Group A need to have a chat.
And I agree with you. I think what you're talking about is the logistics, and that's the next step. I think here, which is that initial decision about, are we going to do it, and if we are, then that would be for the Sacre and Group A to decide when you formally put that together.
Question in the chat.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's a question in the chat.
Yeah, there's a... Katie, do you want to put your microphone on and ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Luciani. Could I just ask a quick question before we vote? Would Ming be the person who would lead the task and finish group, and would there be a really clear remit for the group? Because I think that's, for me, that's what I would need to know for it to be able to go ahead. It seems to be a much more time efficient approach to have the task and finish group and then bring something to the table in terms of something to discuss, because I think, based on my experience of the last couple of sessions with working with you all, as productive as they have been, I'm conscious of time and the time and effort that's been put in. So I think anything that we can do to streamline that and make that much more efficient, I think would be great. So I think two questions really: who's going to lead it? Is that Ming, and is everybody accepting of that? And the second thing is, would there be a clear remit for the group that everybody is understanding of that as part of the Sacre members? Everybody understands the remit of the group.
So my understanding when I met with Ming is that he was very keen to lead this, but again, I think that's logistics. I think that's outside the remit of us just deciding yes and no. And then secondly, the actual remit, again, I think that's more logistics. I think it's outside the remit of us saying yes or no. It's going to be, there is going to be a task and finish group, and as a Sacre, as members, we feel there is a need to have a look at the process and then make suggestions for it to improve, would be my answer to those two questions. But I don't know if Emily, Azele, if you have other...
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, I know Ming is very happy to support the process. He hasn't specifically said he would chair it, but I imagine at the first meeting, the first job would be to choose a chair, which might be Ming or might be someone else, and also to decide on the remit for the group. So I think Stephen's right that for now it's just a decision about do we want a task and finish group or not, and then those things would come later, I think.
I really think Group A need to have a chat. Because if people felt happy with someone to be representing Group A on that group or not, that's going to affect how people are going to vote. If you vote for the group, and then who's going to represent Group A? So, like, we need to know how we would feel as a group working together on this, and how it would work for us to be represented. That's something that we as Group A need to work out among ourselves.
I mean, I'm happy to we can go into the groups if you want, but again, I feel that's a logistic thing, because that would be in your remit and your terms of reference. That is when you as a Sacre would make those decisions as to what your membership looks like. If it is one person from every group, or is it 5 volunteers? I don't know. That would be part of your remit. But if you want to break into groups, we can break into groups. Shahid.
Sorry, leaving aside going into groups, right? I'm still not clear, right? What problem are we trying to resolve here by having the task force? I mean, you mentioned that's the logistics comes later, but to me, actually, that is part of the first, that we need to understand what problem we're trying to resolve. That is a problem, and therefore we need a task force to actually look at that in more detail. So these two things do go along together. We can't just say, let's have the task force, or we worry about what problem we're going to solve later on. See where I'm coming from? I'm not really clear what that is. I think this goes with Stephen was saying is the committee members think, oh, there was a flaw in the whole process, something drastically went wrong, we want this to be reconsidered or looked at what are the lessons learned, and perhaps you can do it better next time. Yeah, so we just need to be clear what problem is there which we're trying to resolve by having a separate task force.
And again, I appreciate your comment sheet and I understand what you're saying, but that's still the logistics that comes later. If we're saying there's a problem...
Sorry, these are two together. You're looking for a solution at the end.
Mindful of time. Emily.
Yeah, sorry, Shahid. To respond to you, I probably should have explained, particularly to people who are new to the meeting, that in previous meetings, some Sacre members have specifically requested that we do a looking back activity to look at what went well, but even better if as well, and with a view to thinking how do we want the syllabus process to look next time we do it. That's specifically a request that's come from some Sacre members. Obviously, I think it's clear that something didn't go quite right with the process because we thought we'd adopted the syllabus and then issues were raised and we had to go back and do more work on it afterwards. So it's clear that the process didn't pan out exactly as it was planned and as it should have done, and some people weren't happy with the process. So that's where this has all come from. That's the background to it.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why we need to do a review is what we do, and I've spoken to a number of sort of RE advisors from different councils about, it's very unusual what Berkshire has done over the past few years in having 6 councils work together on a syllabus. I've received sort of conflicting advice, but some people saying that it's actually not a good idea to do that because what happens is when you try to make things too big, things become top down. And so the concern that certainly I raise is that we ended up not having a proper process where things could genuinely be discussed in the normal ways that Sacres, when we had our ASC, that's the way Sacres are meant to work, where you generally are hashing it out and working out compromises between the groups and doing that real work, real listening. And that didn't happen because we were sort of outsourcing up to experts to tell us how the syllabus should be, and that what ended up happening is that the hub didn't reflect the diversity that you would have in a Sacre. So people thought that things were working when actually they weren't, because they wouldn't realise because there wasn't the diversity there. And so that therefore we need to look and see how things work in the hub. How does the hub operate? How could the hub operate differently? Is it possible to still work on next time round on a PAM syllabus, but have the process work so that you don't end up with the situation that we had? So you make sure that you've got that proper process, that proper conversation where no one feels sidelined. And that's a question, but it's not just a question of Wokingham, it's a question that's being asked in all the councils in Berkshire in terms of whether there can be another PAM Berkshire syllabus in future, and how and frankly no one actually knows. I did ask advice on what's the proper way for a PAN sort of cross council syllabus to be developed. There is no official way it's meant to be done because no one else does it. So that's a sort of that is a real question. It's a question of process to be discussed, not just for us but also across the council. I don't know what the process should be for having that conversation, but those are the questions that are being dealt with.
And I think they're important questions. I think it sounds to me, if for whatever reason Wokingham and Berkshire don't agree to work together, and it's not unusual for, you think, okay, I appreciate Hampshire, Surrey are not unified like us, but they're still very big authorities, and Berkshire's coming together. I think we're just emulating that. I know Surrey won't be, I think, and Hampshire I don't think will be, but that's the conversation for the time. Anyway, those again are the nuances that you would discuss. I think the issue identified, as Emily said, is that there's perhaps maybe some issues with the process, and then the task and finish group will look at some of those issues and then make recommendations moving forward, and whether that be, say, like Wokingham work at the bottom up, and then work with the other authorities, or it continues to be the hub, I don't know, there'll be conversations for the task and finish group. I'm just mindful I do want to take this to a vote because of time, but last point then, Stephen.
I think, I'm just trying to summarise a bit, Chair, for me. I think all we're trying to look at for the task and finish group, if it's established, is the process, what went well and what might be improved. On the task and finish groups I've been part of previously, there were various hearings where we heard from different groups, and therefore probably everybody around this table would actually be invited, and then previous members would have been invited to feed into that at some point during that process. But by doing it in a structured way, you can actually have everybody would have the time to do it. I think having Ming as a facilitator, I've got no problem with. My recommendation on that to the group, whoever's on it, would be that he's probably not the chair. I think a member of Sacre should be the chair. But I think it is defined really in my mind as what worked well, so let's do it again, what could be improved. And then it's going to be a matter of recommendations that come back. So all the things that have been talked about, they're valid points, but this is the sort of thing that would come out through this review. And then recommendations would come from that, which this full committee would then consider in the fullness of time. But I do think that everybody involved in it would be consulted as part of the task and finish group. I can't see it working without. So everybody's voice will be heard in that process.
So if we just go to a vote then to those in favour of setting up a task and finish group. Show of hands. And Katie and Philip, I think. Any abstentions? One abstention. Two abstentions. Any noes? Oh, sorry. Oh, no, one no, one abstention. Thank you. So as an action, I think, Emily, if you perhaps maybe go back to Ming and say the Sacre would like to set that up, and then I think for the September meeting, it'll be like look at sort of the terms of reference of that task and finish group. And finally, annual report.
Yeah, sorry, one more matter's arising, which is around the annual report, actually for the last academic year, which seems to be dragging on for ages. The reason, normally we would have published our annual report by now, but we've been waiting for exam results. At the March meeting I shared with you Wokingham's GCSE results for RS, but I couldn't get hold of the A-level results at that point. So what you've got, and again, apologies, this wasn't in the agenda pack, but you've got a printed handout. Apologies to those in the Teams meeting. I could share it on my screen so that those in the Teams meeting could see it as well. Let me just do that. Yeah, so that is now on the screen. So these are the A-level results for Wokingham and nationally for last summer. So there's a bit of a summary at the bottom. So it says 5 Wokingham schools compared to 3 schools in 2023 entered 37 students for RSA level in 2024, and that compares to 46 students in 2023 and 48 before the pandemic in 2019. 27 of those 37 students achieved grade C or above, so that's 73%, and that's very slightly below the national percentage, which was 77.9%, but it's better than what the Wokingham percentage was in 2019 before the pandemic, and that was 64.5%. If you look at the percentage that got grade A star or A, those very top grades, 27% of Wokingham students got those top grades, which is slightly above the national, which was 25.8%. So a bit of a mixed picture. We had more schools entering students, but fewer students than previous years. Strong outcomes in terms of A star and A, slightly below national for grade C and above. So that will be put in the annual report. And what I'm suggesting is that because we're so late publishing it, what we'll do is get it formatted so it looks attractive by our design team, as we usually do. Publish it on our website so it's there as a record of our work for everyone to see. And we always share that with new members who join the Sacre. But probably I'm thinking I won't, with your permission, my thought is not to share it widely with schools because we're just coming to the end of the next academic year and I'm not sure how interested people are going to be in reading a report that's now a bit out of date, to be honest. So
GCSE results come out on the 21st of August and A-level the week before, so I would agree with that. I'd be looking at, well, yeah, it's nice to know, but actually I'm more interested in this year's.
Just a point of clarification. These schools, all schools which are including the private schools as well, or is it private schools are excluded from these 5 schools which you mentioned here?
yeah, that's a really good question, Shahid. This is not including private schools. It's just so we've got 10 Wokingham maintained secondary schools, whether they're academies or community schools, and it's just out of those 10, 5 of them enter students. Yeah.
Is it possible to have a national comparison of the total number of students? You know, are you able to look at the number of students in Wokingham proportionately and compare that to a national?
Yeah, good question, Alison. I probably could get... So you mean it'd be interesting to know the proportion, the percentage of students that were entered nationally in Wokingham. I probably could get that data, yeah. I'll look into that, yeah.
In 2024, 14,000, my maths is not brilliant, so I do get a GCSE, I promise. 14,499 students nationally sat religious studies against 816,000 in total sitting. So, let's look at the maths there, but there is a big issue at the moment, and Ofqual looking at it in grading for both GCSE and A-level RE, that there are fewer higher grades. So actually it is an issue that has been brought out nationally, that Ofqual have been asked to look into, that actually it is harder to get an A-star in A-level RE than it is in English, and it's also hard to get a grade 9 in GCSE than it is in any of the other subjects. So there is an issue around the severity of marking to do with different markers and the idea of it being much more around the idea of qualitative and much more subjective. So there is an issue that is ongoing at the moment, and it has been flagged by national bodies with Ofqual around the idea that students are not getting the higher grades. So for example, this year, English literature 9.8% of all grades at A-level were A-star, in RE it was 6. So actually where there had been comparable data earlier, 2 subjects, it's now widening in terms of the gap there. But what we are seeing, and same with history was 5.7% of A-star grades, so the much more subjective subjects are actually getting lower A-star grades, and therefore there is work with Ofqual to identify why that is, and the GCSE one actually started last month around.
I'm going to say schools have noted that and raised it up, history, religious studies in particular, that they're finding it's particularly hard for the students to get the higher grades in especially the GCSEs we tend to find.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Stephen, could I just, there were also a couple of actions for me in the March meeting. There were a couple of queries about the GCSE data that I shared. And I think it was you who asked, the data that I shared, did it include students who took GCSE in year 10? Which I found out the answer to. It's year 11 students, but if those year 11 students took the GCSE in year 10, it's included in that data. And Shira asked a question about the percentages of students that were entered, because some of the data looked a bit odd. And I did go back and check, and the data that I shared is correct. So.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we move on? No, thank you, Emily. Emily, issue again, item 3, how things are working in schools.
Thanks, Stephen. So I'm going to be quite brief because when I've done this item before, I've talked about challenges that schools are experiencing, and really their ongoing challenges. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about those, but I thought what you might find interesting is to hear about, in terms of our work with schools as a local authority, what are some of our priorities, because that'll give you an idea of some of the things we're helping schools to work on. So in terms of challenges, just very briefly, I think recruitment of school staff continues to be a challenge. There is national data that suggests that is slightly beginning to improve. Obviously, it's something the government is focused on, but it's still a challenge, I think. I think schools are still supporting children with issues that are hangovers from the pandemic, whether that's academic or well-being or issues around family poverty, family difficulties. We know that there's a lot of concerns about attendance nationally and in Wokingham, and that's gone up since the pandemic, concerns about attendance. There's concerns about children with special needs, and there's a lot of work going on nationally and in Wokingham to develop provision for children with special needs. Schools, particularly some schools, continuing to struggle with their finances. And the cost of living crisis still impacting families, and that's affecting, obviously, children in schools and the issues that schools are having to support children with. So there's a lot for schools to deal with at the moment. I mentioned before that schools were eagerly awaiting information from the curriculum and assessment review that the government are carrying out. And since our last meeting, they've published their interim report. And I know that in Ian's national updates document that's in the agenda pack, he's given some information about what that curriculum review said about RE. And Ian had a meeting very recently with people involved in the review. At the moment, he has to keep quiet about what it says, but there's information will be published in the autumn term, and so that information will soon be publicly available. In terms of the work we're doing as an LA with schools that you might be interested in, Wokingham Borough pledged quite recently to become a Marmot Borough, and that's named after someone called Professor Marmot, who's actually a public health professor, but what he said goes way beyond health and affects education too. And the idea of it is that you need to look beyond your headline data to make sure you're paying attention to the needs of the most vulnerable. So for us in Wokingham, obviously we're a borough where most people have good jobs, good education, good health, but that doesn't apply to everyone in our borough. So we're having a big focus on making sure that while we celebrate all our successes in Wokingham, we have a real focus on the groups of residents in the borough, including children who don't have good outcomes, and that we really focus on those. So within education, we're having a big focus on helping schools to focus on how are we enabling all children to feel they belong in our schools, and obviously attendance is related to that. So there's going to be a focus, well there already is, but a continuing focus on developing inclusion in schools, not just for SEND children, but for any child who's vulnerable at any time. How do we make sure all those children feel comfortable and happy in our schools? And there's various bits of work that all link to that. Like, for example, there's a programme of training that many schools have engaged in called therapeutic thinking, which helps schools to look at how they manage children's behaviour. So rather than thinking, this is a very crude summary, but when a child has challenging behaviour, rather than thinking what's wrong with that child, it's thinking actually what is it about our provision in school that isn't working for that child, and how can we change what we do in school to help that child be able to regulate themselves better in school, for example.
Do you mind if I jump in? This is what I do. I go to schools and train. It's just changing mindset as well and frame, just asking questions instead of like, what's wrong with you, like what's happened to you, or saying, oh, how are you coping? And again, there's a lot of evidence to suggest it helps children deregulate quite quickly and have those emotional conversations with adults.
Yeah, so we're supporting schools to work with children to support their well-being, their mental health. So that's really, there's various other strands of work I could talk about, but it all links into both in social care and in education. Making sure children feel that they belong in school is a big focus at the moment.
I was going to say there's also money coming from the government, so people will be having conversations about that, and also about the extra children who are going to get free school meals and who's going to be identified with that as well. So there's that. Plus they're supposed to be looking at and doing a review of the SEND provision and how that's provided. So that's ongoing by the government, and the schools are having to wait at the moment until they hear, because apparently the money, I forget how many million it is, or billion it is, that they're supposed to be releasing it, sort of thing. So there might be directives you've got to go towards it, or there might not be. We literally don't know. And the extra students who will be able to get free school meals is starting in September.
Emily, is Wokingham part of the Afghan resettlement programme?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we've got 5 families in Wokingham that came to the borough a good few years ago now, maybe 3 years ago, as part of a Home Office resettlement programme. So we've got quite a few children in Wokingham schools from those families, who are mostly doing really well, I think.
I was going to say, we also picked them up from Hong Kong and also Ukraine as well. Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments for Emily? Check online. No. Thank you, Emily. So item 4, or is this Ian? Is this you doing item 4, feedback from teacher networks and training opportunities?
I can do that very briefly.
Ways of Knowing came out from the Oxford Research Review in 2021 from Richard Quay, and was also mentioned in the Deep and Meaningful Report 2024. You often use the term disciplinary knowledge or disciplinary ways of knowing for children to understand how they can interact with the materials. So it is a real clear focus, and we do know from Hazel Henson, who's the new HMI for RE, who I had a meeting with in October earlier this year, that that's going to continue, that there is no rationale at the moment for the change away from the idea of the substantive content about the religions, and then how children interact with that and how they learn with it. And so they use the ways of theologians, social scientists and philosophers to interpret texts, to interpret what people do, but also understanding then as well that when we're studying the Dharmic faith in school, it's done from a diverse viewpoint rather than a Western viewpoint of understanding that actually when we talk about Brahman in the Hindu tradition, not all Hindus will refer to Brahman as God. Brahman is often beyond that one, so that's still a key element of going forward. So it's working with, and myself working with secondary colleagues on how we're interpreting that within the classroom to help children engage with material, to deepen that learning. So rather than being superficial, and develop with that one. And it also is around the idea that, and in fact Linda Rudge mentioned this in the 90s in a piece of her work that has been influential with the ways of knowing that the children who identify as none, so if they were to fill in a survey, none of the above, often don't see the relevance of religious education, but actually enabling them to have the skills of communication through looking at text, through looking at how people live their lives, through how it's interpreted within the faith community is really important for them to understand that there is that rationale there. And one of the key elements, and Emily and I were talking about this earlier, and I will share this, is that the personal knowledge element is really important at the moment. I'm hearing a lot of that, as Emily's just said, from people saying children have to see themselves reflected in the school curriculum. Because we are saying that 25% of children now, the NEU came up with this one, have actually said they don't see themselves in their curriculum. The curriculum is alien to them. So the ways of knowing about engaging children in what it is to be a theologian when they're looking at religion, so really bringing them on board with the, we got rid of the word skills, that's why they were called ways of knowing, and that's the way of looking at it, but really enabling all those children to be interacted with it. So I worked with Sarah on our course, my colleagues, you were always there. My colleagues in primary were the primary colleagues, but it's something actually that, and it's one of those strange things. It came out in 2021, and I did mention this on my course with Sarah, which was the time of COVID. So we had this big change in RA, but actually COVID, I was more bothered about teaching my children from my kitchen table and making sure they turned up online than what we were doing. But it really is now the parlance of RA. And if you look at the Deep and Meaningful report from the 17th of April last year, it really did mention it's a key element. And it's also, if you look into the RE directory from the Catholic schools, it's very much reflected there. It's very much reflected in last autumn's SIAMS report for Church of England and Methodist schools around actually this is the common parlance across all providers of RE at the moment. So actually it's one of the things that we felt was necessary or part of what we wanted to work with working teachers to say, are you up to speed with this one? Because when I work with colleagues around the country, a lot of what I ask is, what are these ways of knowing? And so it's really taking people back to that one. So we've begun that process going forward within Wokingham.
Thanks, Ian. And just to say, both the meetings were very well received, the primary and the secondary. We had quite good attendance at the primary network. We had 13 teachers. The secondary one, as tends to be the case, we had Sarah and one other. So I have talked to Ian about, we've got an alternative plan for our training for secondary teachers next year that will look quite different to what we've done in the past, because we just find that we don't get the attendance from secondary teachers at network.
For whatever reason, I don't know, but I'm usually definitely there, and I'm happy if there's more than two others there, sort of thing. It is really a difficult situation with secondary school teachers, even the ones online, and so any possible ideas would be gratefully received, because I get a bit fed up talking to myself.
We also had a training event related to the syllabus, which was going to be billed as the launch event for the Berkshire syllabus, but obviously at the time it happened, teachers were made aware that not every local authority in Berkshire had actually approved the syllabus, and there might be changes to the syllabus. But the event still went ahead because it was felt that there were some general things we could look at that would be useful to teachers, even if some local authorities ended up making changes to their syllabus. So I think Philip was there, I know, Sarah was there. We actually had 27 teachers from Wokingham, which was you know, I think as much or as more than other local authorities.
But were most of them primary school teachers, I bet, yeah?
Most of them were primary. I think we had maybe 3 secondary schools represented. Yeah. So, but it was a really, I think it was a useful event to people. There was a lot of talk about useful resources.
Just so you know, my head teacher has actually brought it up with Julian Bushell, so it is being talked about the fact that secondary school teachers in particular are not attending and what can be done, okay, because it would be good to have them there.
Yeah. So we have got dates in the diary for primary network meetings for next year, and I mean I was going to mention this under when we talk about the development plan, but I could mention now that Ian's suggestion is, obviously we'll be interested in your thoughts, Sarah, that for secondary schools, instead of having network meetings, we have a full day in person in the summer term next year after exams are finished, when teachers are slightly less busy. And we tried to put together a plan for the day, obviously related to our new syllabus, that we hope will be appealing, and we can also potentially advertise it to other local authorities and charge teachers from other local authorities, whereas it'd be free for Wokingham teachers. And we might even make some income, never know. So that's our thought, to try and appeal to secondary teachers next year.
I like the idea of that. I'm just thinking of my time when I was head of department at Wangels. There's no way you would have got my whole department out. And also, I hear what you're saying after the exams, but I know some of our Wokingham secondary schools, they do the GCSE in year 10, and they still have those year 10 students in front of them, even after the exam. So it's just something to be mindful of, and the cover and the cost implications.
Yeah.
Sorry to sort of rain on your parade, because I think it's a great idea, but just...
I would also say it might be quite good floating it past head teachers. Would they be prepared to actually let them, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who say yay or nay. Okay, so would they be prepared to let them out? You could also get exam boards in, resources, that would be quite good for people. Maybe some of the publishers, if there's any new resources out there, especially if you get any freebies from them, that's always a good way to get people dangling things, sort of thing. That could be quite good. Anything where you can give people something to go away with that they can use, I think, is a way to sort of, you know, dangle the bait on the hook, sort of thing, because people are busy, and if they can take it and use it rather than feel they're just sitting there, and I don't mean it in a nasty way, but just being talked at, then I think they're more likely to be positively engaged in it and be willing to come along and engage in it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, prime example is on Thursday I'm up in the northeast with 49 secondary school teachers for a whole day, and we've got the publishers, we've got the exam boards, so it has brought them out. But it's also opened up to the other local authorities. It's a small unitary authority with a big shire county next door to it. So the idea is that, as you say, the plan is to have it along those lines, and also, given where we are, maybe getting somebody in, maybe from the curriculum assessment review, to talk about what's happened, maybe somebody from Ofsted as well, to bring that keynote person that teachers will want to listen to, and really build it into a full day for secondary school teachers, where they can also network. I think one of the things we found with yourself is that isolation the secondary school teachers are feeling, whereas actually if we can get out for the day, and the idea is we put it on for this 22nd of June, so you know, you can leave your work on a Friday, have a weekend, and come out to us on the Monday. That's what we were thinking of.
To keep the costs down, you could always maybe ask one of the local schools if you could use their facilities. I mean, like we have a sixth form block where you can just use it all upstairs and things like that, which would keep down the cost and make centralisation much more feasible, sort of thing. So that you can, if you have to pay some of these other ones, then you can get that involved as well.
Any other questions or comments, family? No? So next item, Emily, is item 5, development plan and the budget.
Thanks, Stephen. So in the agenda pack, just looking what page it's on, page 25 is the development plan. So this is a draft plan because we haven't shared it with you before. Myself and Ian have discussed this, but we're bringing it to you to get your thoughts. So section A is really always the same every year, and I think it is the sort of statutory normal things that a Sacre does. So fill our membership vacancies, which I was saying to Luciani, we will have a few of to look at for the next academic year. attend termly Sacre meetings, encourage Sacre members to come to our teacher network meetings and training events, and or visit local schools. So obviously we will share with you the dates of all our network meetings and training, and you are all most welcome and encouraged to come. We have to produce an annual Sacre report, review our action plan at each meeting and update it, subscribe to NASICA, and then attend NASICA's annual conference. So those are all the sort of core things that we do every year. Section B is where you're very welcome to input your thoughts, and this is what the Sacre does to support teachers of RE. So what we're proposing, as we've just been saying, is a primary network meeting every term, and then for secondary school teachers, 1 full day's training in the summer term. And I just realised when I was looking before the meeting, there's an error there. It should say full day secondary training late summer term 2026, not 2025. And we're thinking the primary network meetings will be online. Something else that we always have done in previous years and we're planning to do next term is a subject leader training session for primary school teachers who are new to leading the subject of RE. So that's what we've got in section B around supporting teachers. Section C has got a big question mark next to it at the moment, because usually section C is where we write about what the Pan Berkshire Hub will do, and obviously we're at a point at the moment where we don't know what's happening with the hub going forward. We've actually got a discussion item on that for this meeting, and then we'll need to feed into discuss that with the other Berkshire local authorities, of course. But I don't know if people have any thoughts about anything that's there or anything that isn't there that you think we should consider putting into our plan.
I think for me it's nice to see business as usual. I think we've been, and rightly so, all consumed with the locally agreed syllabus and making sure that's completed. But it's quite nice to see we're back to sort of, network meetings. There's training potentially for our secondary teachers. So for me, I think it's really positive. Sarah?
Can I just say that the fact that I'm the only secondary school teacher here, it might be an idea to do either some communication in some way, if they're going to receive the secondary school teachers, the head of RE, the new syllabus, they need to be informed about it, and June is a long time away, whereas they should and ought to be thinking about doing some prep before they get there. Otherwise they've had essentially 2.5 terms before they get to the big one. So maybe something in the autumn term about giving them some information, some feedback, and saying, look, this is also coming up, but here's something you might want to start working on, with the key ideas and development and all of that, and this is what the key changes are. That might be an idea. Because I know about it, but nobody else does. That's the key thing there.
Something we're introducing in some of the training I do now is a webinar, like a quick 15-minute webinar that's sent out to sort of delegates beforehand, and then they come to the training with that kind of knowledge and things. That potentially could be something where, and I don't know who would present it. We've experimented with AI voices and it's not good, but yeah, just like a short webinar, it could be like something around the curriculum review or anything, but just a quick thought. Sorry, Beth.
Yeah, I was going to add on to what Sarah said. Perhaps the best way to communicate with teachers about what's going on is an annual or a termly, not sure which, newsletter of forthcoming events. Even those that aren't involved with the Sacre know what's going on and can plan their training.
Thank you, Chair. It occurs to me that with B, obviously I'm new into this. This may already be what you do, I just don't know. That where we're trying to provide resources for the schools and to work with them, I'm just wondering how much input the schools have into what they need, and therefore we're hearing from them, and then we provide what they need. Because if they don't feel that they can release somebody for a whole day, even if they think it's valuable what they would learn, they're not going to do it. And I just think it might be worth, before we get this one is going to be set in stone, that's fine. But for future years, I'm just wondering if we could do a letter out to all of the primary and secondary heads and the RE people through them, just saying, look, we've got this funding, we want to try and do something that works for you. What could you support, and what would you want to be included? And then we try and tailor it, because this really is for the educationalists, isn't it, this section? And therefore, let's find out what they want, rather than we try and tell them.
So we historically do send letters and emails every year. Emily's on it, and people just don't. Yeah, people don't respond, sadly. I know back when I was subject leader, we would have the federation inset. That's gone now, isn't it? The federation inset, where all the secondaries would come together the same day, and we would take in turns. Once Sarah hosted one year, we came and did the island. But I remember that inset, and I think we hosted it another year, and we had RE today came and did something. So I think what I'm trying to say in all of this is that Emily does engage with with all of our schools, just sometimes the response is not always as good as what we'd like.
No, thank you. I wasn't trying to criticise, and as I say, I don't know, I'm ignorant on this, but yeah, but thank you. Thanks for
I can actually say that when we did do the federation things, I think it was much more positively attended, because everybody on the whole day around Wokingham all went to the place where they went. So RE might go to one school, English another, or there might be 2 or 3 subjects in each one. So everybody wasn't teaching on that day, so there was no opt-out, everybody was opted in automatically. And so that meant everybody was involved. So that was why it was very positive in that respect.
Are there not sort of like social media or sort of like on the internet sort of discussion boards or whatever for RE teachers in particular areas I've seen these where they share resources with each other. Are there not sort of forums like that where one could communicate with teachers that way?
You can go on and you can access resources, but that is not talking about the pedagogy behind teaching, what the skills you're supposed to be developing, why it's going this way, about what the new rules are and all of that. I mean, I went to an ECT meeting last week, that's for the newly qualified teachers, okay, and I sat down there and Julian came up to me, Julian Bushell, and said, oh, I've had this email from this school, they're an academy, but they wanted to know what are the hours they should be going and teaching to Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5, and they can't get hold of a Sacre member, and it's your lucky day, Julian, I'm sitting here, so I can tell you, and I just wrote it down, but that's the thing, you see. So now, yeah, there should be open forums, but people don't join them, or many people aren't in them, sort of thing. I mean, I don't tend to do social media because otherwise I get looked at. One of the kids looking up Miss Whiteford. No, you can't look for me there. So that's the issue. So that school, it was down the road. It was the Holt school. They could have emailed me and asked me. Okay, I'm not. They wouldn't necessarily know I was on Sacre, but they would have known that I was the head of RE. They could have emailed me, but they didn't. They're very insular, inward looking, and they don't tend to go elsewhere. And that, unfortunately, we're all busy people. It might be coming towards the end of the academic year, but I marked 300 books last week. I did 2 exams, and you know what I mean. So people are busy, and it's a case of, I think the Federation was a sad loss in the sense that everybody stopped on that day and you all went, because then it meant there was no opting out of it. Everybody was getting involved in it, and unfortunately with the network, then they have to opt in rather than they opt out, sort of thing.
Are there any other comments around the development plan? And then item C, as Emily said, we will discuss the hub shortly.
Should I just say quickly about the budget?
I was going to say the budget, I was just saying we will talk about.
So yeah, very quickly, you've got 2 budget documents. One of them's for the end of the last financial year. And I shared most of this at our meeting in March. We just had a few spends to come out, which are the ones that are in purple. And so you can see our end of year spending we actually had a bit of an underspend, and I did ask if we could carry that forward, but unfortunately we weren't allowed to do that. The main reason we had an underspend was because we were not asked, we budgeted £900 to give to the hub, because normally every year we had to give £900 to the hub, but last year the hub actually had enough funds and they didn't ask Sacre for that money. So yeah, we had a bit of an underspend, which makes my finance colleagues very happy. But yeah, we could have spent more. The other budget document is a draft plan for this financial year that we're currently in to support our development plan. It has got a few things that are a bit unknown and are estimated at the moment. So currently, for example, we're just in the process of confirming our contract. We're starting a new contract with RE today, and we're not exactly sure what fees they're going to charge yet. I've assumed that they're going to continue charging us what they have been charging us for Ian's time, but it's possible that might increase. I've also put in some money towards the hub, but obviously we don't know if there's going to be a hub or what the cost will be. So this is very much a draft with some things that might change. I have shared this with finance colleagues, and it is actually more than the funds we get allocated. And the reason for that is every year the Sacre gets allocated the same amount of money, which is £6,800, and I have explained to them that doesn't really work for us because most of our costs go on our RE advisor, and obviously those costs go up every year, mostly, and they totally understand that, and they understand, therefore, we will probably overspend, and as long as it isn't by huge amounts, we have permission to do that. So.
Just about RE today, so we subscribe, what do we get for that, and what can Sacre members access from RE today?
Sorry, Shira, we don't subscribe, there's a difference there. Schools can subscribe, and maybe Sacres can subscribe, I don't know, Ian, but being a subscriber, we commission RE Today to provide our RE advisor. So we pay a daily rate to RE Today for Ian's time, but we don't subscribe as such.
And what's the mandatory Woking and Borough e-learning course is half a day?
Oh. Yeah, so Ian actually probably hasn't had the joy of doing any of these yet, but as a Woking and Borough employee, or I understand it, a consultant, there are certain mandatory courses that WBC people have to do, like around safeguarding, for example, data protection. And certainly when Angela was our advisor, she was required to do those. I haven't actually had any requests for Ian to do any of those courses, so if I keep quiet, he might get away without having to do them.
Stephen.
I get what you were saying, Emily, about the budget being set at one number and we can spend differently. That, to me, as a councillor, seems really stupid. Can you please feed back that I'd like to have certainty as a council that the budgets that we're presented with at council actually reflect what we're likely to spend, because if it stays at that number and looking forward to next year, you're looking at beginning to get to the point where it's like a 50% overspend. And I think if we had that kind of behaviours going on in other areas, we'd be extremely concerned. So I just think, I know it's small sums, but I think the numbers should reflect what we believe is the budget, not just, oh, that doesn't matter. Thank you.
I'll take that back, thank you.
Any other questions around the budget?
Just to ask, if Ian was invited to attend the Task and Finish group to contribute, would that be more time and more pressure on the budget?
Yes, but then I mean, looking at this, there's probably sort of wiggle room within some of this. For example, like the hub, we could actually say maybe sort of Ian's time possibly we use in that, and it's very dependent on what the hub does. We've never been, I mean, Emily's always managed the budget very, and like I said, it's small numbers, has always managed the budget efficiently, and we've had an underspend this year as well, so I suspect moving forward the budget will continue to be managed efficiently, and I do take your point that actually as a council, I mean, our budget has stayed static, I think, for as long as, and I look around the room, I think it's only Shahid, Shira and Beth have been here longer than me, and they'll know as well from their experience the budget has stayed static for that many years, which is frustrating at times.
Silly in accounting terms, it's silly.
And most of the time, it's fair to say we've underspent, haven't we?
Yeah.
Not overspent. So.
Okay, so item 6, Pan Berkshire Hub, the way forward. Emily, do you want to sort of lead us? Because I know you had some discussion points you wanted to sort of share.
Yeah, so I guess just very briefly to say, we briefly discussed this at the March meeting, very briefly, and I think a vote was taken, as I remember, on whether people were in favour of the hub continuing. Obviously, it's to be decided what it looks like, but there was a vote in favour of the hub continuing in some form, because people could see that it could be useful. But obviously, we're at a point now where Anne Andrews, who was leading the hub, has retired. It's possible that the diocese may have interest in leading the hub going forward, but we don't know. We talked when we last discussed this briefly about the sort of activities the hub could potentially do. So, for example, the hub could work on developing materials to support the syllabus. The hub has engaged in really useful projects to develop resources for teachers, like the Real People, Real Faith materials, which I think everyone agrees are really high quality. So there are various things, I guess, to decide, like who ideally do we... I think it does probably need someone to coordinate the hub, like Anne Andrews used to do. Who do we think we would like to do that? What kind of activities would we like the hub to do? What should its purpose be? Who should attend hub meetings? Who should make up the hub? Are just some things to think about.
I should say a bit of context for everyone. So the hub was set up many, many years ago. It was just after I think I'd taken over from chair from Michael, because we were there. And the remit of the hub was just to try and coordinate and bring all the unitary authorities together and try and, like, economies of scale, but share good practice, where possible, write the syllabus together. There were 3 people who went for the position of hub coordinator. Was Joe, I have to remember Joe Fadgen, yeah, Joe Fadgen, Anne and Jan. Jan took over as the hub, Jan Lever, so she was our previous advisor, and then when Jan stepped back, and then her company also stepped back from sort of working within Berkshire, that's when Anne took on the hub. And that's kind of where we're at now. I have to be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed that we kind of got to this situation where the hub has kind of just fallen flat. I think maybe we could have been a bit more proactive, working with our sort of neighbours and partners across Berkshire to have these conversations a bit earlier, but we are where we are. Just open the floor to any sort of comments or questions. Katie, and then Shira.
Hi, yes. So just so that you're aware, I am the advisor, the RE advisor for Bracknell Forest currently, and also for RBWM. And I've heard today that Reading have approached the diocese for more support. So in that respect, so if that goes ahead, it's likely that I will be advisor on 3 Sacres across Berkshire, and then here as a CAB rep for Wokingham. So if that is of use to anybody in terms of driving things forward, I think the conversation with Ian would be really helpful at some point. But it just depends on what you want. But the offer's there. I'm going to be quite sort of across at least 4 potentially, certainly 3 at the moment, if that's helpful for you to know.
Thank you, Shira. And Shaheen.
I mean, there's this whole conversation that needs to be taking place about how things went with the syllabus development, because a lot of that happened in the hub, and how well the hub is functioning, and what and the need for better representation on the hub from Group A. There's a whole conversation that needs to be had. A lot of that needs to be cross between the councils. I don't know how to sort of organise the sort of direction of how that conversation would move to reach, but it seemed to me that there need to be a number of people from different Sacres who can sit together sort of and critically look at what's gone well, what's gone badly, and then and then have a proposal to move forward that they can then bring to their Sacres about what the hub, the way because the hub does various different things. So at times it seems the hub has effectively been acting. In fact, I've seen some minutes of some Sacres where they almost called the hub the ASC for Berkshire, except that it didn't have the representation issue. And on the other hand, the hub is organising training events for teachers. So you've got these multiple purposes of the hub, and it might be that those multiple purposes might not always have the same groups. So like if it's training for teachers, maybe it's teachers bringing in the advice that they need from whatever, faith groups that they need for, but if it's a syllabus development, it needs to sort of simulate like a super sacre so that it's got the representation depending on what function it's serving, because the hub has been serving these different purposes simultaneously.
I think we need to be clear what is the purpose of the hub, what is there for, what is its remit, what it should do, what it shouldn't do. But in principle, I think despite its flaws, I think this should be hub, stronger, and objectives, some of them, Stephen, you highlighted, sharing best practice and working together in partnership across all our different boroughs. But also, I think to bear in mind is that our children who may be living in, for example, Reading, they come to Wokingham, and our children go across the other borough as well. So even though we set up a syllabus, but actually that not be the one they will be studying. They'll be studying, next door neighbours. So it makes sense to have collaboration, partnership, working together, sharing, learning, and actually, and also potentially saving some money as well as a result of that as well. So I think in principle, yes, definitely, we should pursue that. But how do we make it effective? What it should, remit should be, that probably needs more clarifying.
I agree with you, sort of as a relaunch of the hub that does perhaps maybe need looking at sort of what is the hub's remit, because historically it has worked very well. It has, I think, way back when it started. Do you remember the Crossing the Bridges project? Again, sort of colleagues who've been around the room for. And I know Catherine Jenkins did quite a lot on that as well. And then I remember we had various sort of events. The membership historically was chairs and vice chairs. And that was very fluid as chairs sort of came and changed. So I remember Z, for example, he was part of the hub way back in sort of the early days. This is just how I sort of possibly envision things. Maybe as a local authority, as Wokingham, maybe we need to decide, yes, we want the hub to continue. And then perhaps maybe, I agree with what you're saying, perhaps representation does need looking at. But I think maybe the chairs need to come together and decide what that is, what the hub looks like, and then put together the terms of reference and say, this is actually moving forward, what it needs to be, because I don't think we can make these decisions in isolation and trying to get, I agree with you can't, and trying to get Wokingham to talk to Bracknell and talk to everyone, it's going to be too big, I think. That's just how I possibly, as a way moving forward, chair, vice chair, across all of them, get together, say, yes, I want to carry on, this is what it looks like, this is what the membership should be moving forward. But again, how we lead that, I don't know, because Anne Andrews has retired. In case you're obviously here, you're working across various different authorities. Those are just sort of my thoughts, just my rambling on a Monday evening. Beth?
I agree with what Stephen said, but I think the hub needs to become more sophisticated because it grew almost accidentally all those years ago. I think it's done about, 6 syllabi.
I've done 3 in my time. So.
Yeah, so quite a few, and it's worked very well. I think this year, and I don't know why, hasn't worked as well because it hasn't met the expectations of all our groups. So I think we need to have a purpose for the hub, possibly a lead authority and a stricter membership of people from time to time. So, for instance, when you're writing the syllabus, and Andrews always drew it together, but at that time we need more than chairs and vice chairs on it. We need representatives of the various faiths. And for our children and our teaching staff, I think it's essential as they move around the county from school to school, they are exposed to the same subjects, same plans, And so for their comfort and ease, I think it's essential, but I think we need to make the hub sharper. We give it a set purpose with a proper organisation rather than the ad hoc one that we've had of, well, I'll go this time, you go next time. It needs to have a proper timetable, a proper purpose, and all that sort of thing. And I think for all our teachers in Berkshire, that could be very good for training, that we could do a lot of that stuff that we used to do, the really good stuff that we used to do, because we've got the expertise, all we need to do is gather it.
I'm just going to say what that should come out with, maybe the remit with the group that we first talked about. They might come up with some recommendations with regard to what the hub should or shouldn't look at and work on. That could be something that you could put in there, any recommendations for the hub work.
An opportunity to reshape it.
In terms of the coordination, that's, I think, quite a difficult question for us to answer, because it involves that sort of conversation across other Sacres. But the way I kind of envision, once you have that coordinator, that key person, I don't know if it needs to go out to tender, tender's the wrong word, out to advert, a coordinator, then I think you could start putting together your terms of reference of what the hub looks like in agreement with all the other Sacres, and then you can put together your membership.
Yeah, so I think at the moment, I'm not quite sure, but I think some Sacres I know have had a change of RE advisor recently, or they're having a bit of a gap where they haven't actually got an RE advisor in place. But potentially, I guess what could happen is when all the Berkshire Sacres have all got an RE advisor in place, maybe those advisors could meet and say which one of them, if any, would be interested in potentially leading the hub, or how do they see that coordination working. I don't know what you think, Ian, and then share that with Sacres, and that could maybe be the first step.
Yeah. I do think that the problem of coordination and agreeing across the different councils on what the shape of the new hub is going to be, it might not be as difficult as you think, because I think there's growing realisation across the councils that if there's going to be a planned Berkshire syllabus again, and we're developing that together, we have to simulate what would happen in a normal Sacre in order for the process to work. I think that's been learnt, and I'm pretty sure that feedback is going to be given by various people at various different Sacres. I mean, so I don't think we should be so pessimistic about the idea that we could reach some sort of muddle through to some sort of new setup.
And I think that's definitely achievable. I think it's just that initial sort of step. I think there needs to be one person coordinating and pulling all of that feedback together.
I was going to say, what it is, it's about, I think there's a lot of goodwill towards it. It just needs to be looked at again with fresh eyes and made sharper and more on task. I think everybody's willing to buy into that, and I think the key thing about that will all be the communication between all the Pine Berkshire groups. That's the key thing about it. You know, maybe starting with the advisors, talking to each other first, and going from there. Okay.
I think I agree with what Shira was saying. I'll be very surprised if there's a negative response from other Sacres, right? That we don't want to be part of this. I anticipate the positive response is going to be positive. Emily, I mean, one thing you suggest is how do we take this forward, right? One way is the RE reps to do that, and when every Sacre has a RE rep in place. I don't know how long that's going to take place. Or other option could be the chairs actually can talk to the chairs as well. Look, this is what we think. What do you think? And get some feedback and just whether there's a problem. Maybe this way we can actually, get to know maybe quicker response. So it could be, either way, because I'm not sure how long it's going to take before there's a rep has been appointed for each of the Sacre.
Just there is a bit of churn amongst sort of chairs as well across the Berkshire Sacres. Obviously, I'm stepping back, and I know a couple of my other colleagues across other authorities are also stepping back. So just again, I hear what you're saying. I think that possibly could be a way forward in using sort of vice chairs as well.
Vice chairs as well.
Yeah. Stephen.
thank you for all the info on that, because I didn't know anything about the hub, so that's useful to know. It sounds to me, from what's been said, that it has served a very useful purpose in the past and it could do again. I think that getting the professionals to talk together about what's needed is a good idea. We've input from a chair or vice chair or both from each of the Sacres, so there's a consensus around that. Putting it under one lead authority, that happens quite a bit across Berkshire with other things. So I think that's a really good idea because it would then have some focus and some support behind it, which may be what's needed, and also some consistency, because that's, I think, is what's... You've had some very good people, it seems, in the past. Losing them and has been partly what's lost its way. I think if we can try and, say, give it a year to try and achieve that, and then do that review to report back to the Sacres, so that this time next year we can then say, right, this is what the hub's going to be doing, this is what it's going to be delivering, this is what it's going to be costing. Then all of the Sacres can then buy into that, hopefully. So we don't sort of spend forever and have this conversation as we are now, but we have some certainty about what we can expect. And I would hope that each of the different groups will be able to feed into that in some way, because if there is going to be some resources that they're going to look to develop to help the schools, then surely the schools must be having an input into that, because otherwise they're not going to get what they need. But having that ability to produce something that can be then used in loads of places, obviously is going to have some economies of scale and some benefits. So I think it's worth pursuing, but let's not just keep pushing it forever. It has to have a purpose and an outcome from it.
Beth?
Can I suggest that the Sacre, the hub as it stands now, what's left of it, brings a report back to this committee for November meeting, next meeting, and that Ian and I, because Stephen will be leaving, and so I will act up as chair, have something to bring back as a proposal about what the other authorities are thinking, what they're prepared to do, and what we think we can do together to this meeting, Pan Berkshire.
Shahid?
Just a thought, right? But sometimes there may have a perception that one particular Sacre wants to take over, the control and the dominant. So I think maybe, I don't know what the best practice was before with the previous hub, that we can have the chair of actually being rotated across all of the other Sacres as well. So this way, everybody, has, so there's no dominant player here, but everybody actually have the responsibility. So this will feel less threatening in some cases. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, right? But maybe just a thought.
I don't think we ever, as chairs and vice chairs, felt that. I think we historically in Wokingham probably led the charge a little bit. And I know Emily sort of used some of our admin time to coordinate sort of getting people together. And I never felt, I don't know, maybe I'm misreading it, but I never felt that from sort of my colleagues across the hub.
Not recently, but I think years ago there was someone in with a commercial eye on what was going on. I'm trying to be very careful with my words.
I was thinking, being here a couple of, been so long that probably brings to mind.
Yeah,
there was some time, there was some tension. I'm just thinking that, to prevent that, to making sure that there's no one dominant player here. Maybe, I'm not suggesting that there will be, I'm not. I'm just saying that just make it easier for everyone to be part of the process rather than make it difficult as such.
So I think your action, Beth, was sensible, and then equally as another one, possibly is if the advisors get together and maybe have those initial conversations around if there's any one of the advisors who potentially would like to lead them feedback to the Sacre, so you can make that decision. It's not a decision that's made in isolation, that everyone's involved.
I hope Ian's written that down.
Are there any other comments around the hub? Okay, so if we move on to item...
Do we need to vote on that, Chair?
Procedurally, Emily, do we need to vote? Because we voted at the March meeting to say we did want the hub to continue. We decided in the March meeting that we wanted that. What we've decided, I think, is all we've said is that we're just getting the advisors to talk, I think.
Yeah, just do a bit of investigation.
Yeah. I don't, is there, is,
You can go.
I don't just, okay.
No, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so item 7, national updates, including Sacre updates. Ian, is this you?
Yeah, you have in your pack from page 33 the national update that we put together. One I will spend a little more time on, if that's agreeable with members of the Sacre, is the curriculum assessment review, because it has been updated since this was written. The curriculum assessment review was brought forward by Bridget Phillipson in response to the curriculum, say, were any changes needed to the curriculum since Michael Gove's changes were brought in 11 years ago now. And this is looking at all elements of the curriculum. The interim report was published, it says there, RE is only one of 2 subjects mentioned by name, and that's really the other response is religious, PSHE, relationships and sex education is the other area mentioned. So paragraph 9 or section 9 of the interim report does mention RE by name. And this is because there is a lot of confusion around RE still and its place within the curriculum. That the 1988 Education Act put RE as a basic curriculum subject, that is under review. Because the issue is, because there are 152 local authorities, therefore potentially 152 Sacres, is that there are many different models of RE. This has been mentioned continually since 1988 and since 1996 when the Education Act was reviewed, and is mentioned in the 2010 non-statutory guidance around RE. The discussions at the DFE around the curriculum assessment review are that RE is still exceptionally important in the department. And Catherine McKinley, who is the Minister of State for Education, actually gave a written response in Parliament, and I'll quote you this one, that RE is an important subject that should provide pupils with an opportunity to learn about a wide range of religious and non-religious beliefs. Schools should consider how their curriculum can develop skills and empathy, as well as equip children and young people with the skills for living in a diverse society. For older pupils, RE should also focus on developing skills that are useful in a wide range of careers and adult life. And we do know in relation to this that the Gatsby criteria are also under review. So the Gatsby criteria, which relate to the standards for careers education information and guidance in schools, is also under review at the same time. Now, discussions that have happened with Sacre members, with HMI from RE, with the committee, have focused on the status of RE, whether it should be in the national curriculum or not, and that is still an ongoing discussion. And we will find out in the autumn what is being recommended to ministers. What is very clear, though, is that these are only recommendations. It won't be the final form of the curriculum. However, Becky Francis and Vanessa Ogden, Becky Francis is the chair of the review, had a meeting with the RE Council and said they are still exceptionally keen on the local element of RE. So that is not likely to change at all, that both of them are very keen on that one. And I met with John Hutchinson, who is the other RE teacher on the curriculum assessment review the other week, and he said children must see themselves in the curriculum, so they have to see their own lives reflected in it, but learn about other people's lives. So it is very interesting that actually one of the things that's mentioned in the report, and I've written it and paragraphed it and paraphrased it, I've used it exactly, is that they are very keen on looking at a national content standard for RE. So what would RE be like? Because one of the issues that's come out of the curriculum assessment review is that when you're inspecting RE, and I'm off to do one of those very shortly, we don't have a common standard of what RE should be, whereas we do for history, we do for geography in the form of the national curriculum, we don't for RE. So the national content standard will be used then by syllabus writers when they are developing an agreed syllabus. Therefore, the local element is still going to be a key player within RE. We are aware of that one. They are very much on the line of, we're not sure whether we keep it basic or national curriculum. However, what we have been assured of is that GCSE is overloaded and that there is too much information for children to have deep and meaningful learning about RE or about any subject. So they are not looking at how many GCSEs pupils do, they're looking at is the content still relevant. So for example, discussions I've also heard have been around a functional maths GCSE for pupils who don't want to go on and do A-level. So they are looking at all subjects in terms of the content for that one. And there will be recommendations in the autumn report around those ideas as well for GCSE and A-level, around the amount of work, because they're saying it's too much. And that came very clearly from all teachers when they responded to the call for evidence in the autumn term last year. What they have said is that it will be incremental change, so it won't be a big bang change to the curriculum. And they were very much at pains to say, and for teacher colleagues that love this one, that if there were changes to year 1 in 1 year, there would not be changes to year 2 in the same year, because it's not about overloading teachers. So it may be that any change that came at Key Stage 1 will be at the same time as Key Stage 3, but Key Stage 3 changes will not come at the same time as Key Stage 4. So the idea is to manage the expectation, the workload of staff, should changes come about. Now, the ideas around the National Content Standard would then be that that will be something that dioceses and other providers of education who are from religious faith communities could then use that as the basis to develop their own curriculum model. So that's the idea of the locality of it, because if we were to impose a national curriculum as we did in history and geography, then everybody would have to follow it. And that would then, in terms of schools that may have a Section 48 inspection, might be an issue around those ideas. But as I say, there were, and I can't say what they were, but there were discussions on Friday afternoon, and I kept thinking I'm going out, so I had to hurry up please, but there were late discussions on Friday afternoon that it is really important for the world of RE that we are still going to be there. One of the things that's been impacted is Lord Khan of Burnley, and I know that he was in the Sacre conference, and it's very strange to see somebody stood there called Lord Khan of Burnley, who you remember being his form tutor. So that really does age me around those ideas. And Lord Billamoria are still really pushing the agenda for RE. And one of the things they've both said about Sacre, which is coming through, is it's one of the few times now that the faiths get to sit together. And they say that Sacres are important for that because the interfaith network is no longer there. But actually, the Sacre is the one time when members of different faiths actually sit and talk about education and the role of education and their own faith background. So they are very clear that Sacres are important for that reason. And also a lot of what we're hearing from the curriculum assessment reviews, RE is a worthwhile academic subject in its own right. But with all the other subjects, it should be around community cohesion, it should be around all the legislation that we spoke about recently around the Equalities Act that's supporting children in developing those British values, really putting those spiritual, moral, social, cultural development really at the centre of what's been talked about. It's about the whole child, and RE is an important part of that one. But we do know that any recommendation they make will then go to ministers, and they will determine the final view, which is very interesting when you have the Minister of State giving written responses around how important RE is and around about how useful it is in terms not just of community cohesion but as an academic subject in its own right. So we will hear more. When we say autumn, we never know what autumn actually means. However, it is interesting that Lord Khan, is a Minister of State, Lord Billamoria in the House of Lords are really pushing RE forward in those areas. It really is becoming quite interesting times to listen to RE. And also, alongside that one, in terms of national work, we do know the BBC are also in the middle of looking at this, and they're also redeveloping their RE work as well for schools to make sure it is relevant around the idea of religion and non-religious worldviews, and really bringing their work up to date as well. So there are big things happening at the moment, and I keep having many meetings, shall we say, as a National RE advisor, listening to what's actually going on. It's really important to do those.
A couple things. First thing is, I heard from someone that what's going to be happening is that RE syllabuses coming out of Sacre's may be vetted by the by the Department of Education for their suitability before they can be implemented, in order to prevent sort of syllabuses that are bad being implemented. Have you heard that? I did hear that from somebody.
I've not heard that. The only thing I've heard in relation to that one is being able to use the National Content Standard as a marker for what quality RE would look like. One of the things, as I say, that came out around this one, as part of this one, is actually the varied nature of agreed syllabuses. So, for example, some agreed syllabuses, and I won't mention names, are actually 4 sides of A4 long, and some are actually 350 pages long. And so the idea is it's finding the medium that the 4 pages are giving no guidance on pedagogy. It's very much around here's the title, just go and do what you feel like, whereas actually it's about ensuring that what the faith is about is being taught. So it's ensuring then that actually all of them follow the same guidance. And in that way, one of the things that comes through is that will help initiative training, because actually people being trained to teach RE, primary and secondary, will then know what RE actually is, which sounds a very strange thing to think about, but I've mentioned my training before, but it will also then be around the idea that external bodies that quality assure schools will then have a benchmark to come to that one, because Deep and Meaningful did make it very clear, and I know this was brought up in Joyce Miller's report at Sacre, is the idea of the quality of RE and standard of RE across different schools when Ofsted has been exceptionally variable. And it's also saying that if there's a national content standard, that would also then mean that all schools would have to be teaching it. So it goes very much back to your question earlier, Sarah.
I was going to say, I mean, that's really a big issue for sorry.
That was the second. That was more like a short question. But the second issue is: are there consultations happening then with sort of various faith groups, because some of these issues of national content standards, I'm thinking about some of the more recent stuff coming to the RE Council, has actually not necessarily been agreeable to all faith groups because of framing religions as being worldviews. I'm sort of nervous that could then be snuck in the back door.
Not at the moment. The idea is that they will put forward what they think their recommendations are. If then there was to be a national content standard, it would have to be reviewed, and then the DFE would have to put a party together of all groups who then could have an input into that one. So, for example, in that sense, where we have faith schools of different faiths, they would have to be involved in it. So in my own former local authority, we had a number of Jewish faith schools, we had a number of Muslim faith schools, we had a Sikh school. They would have to be involved because it's part of their curriculum as well. That would then apply to everybody.
So there would be another consultation. If there is going to be a national content standard, there would be another consultation in order to produce that. Okay.
No, what all they've mentioned is they've used the word national content standard in the interim report, because that was mentioned by a number of people, but they've not yet made any recommendations on what that would be. That would come for something later.
No, I was going to say, I mean, I think a big issue here is for a lot of them, I don't know if you're aware, like training RE teachers is in massive decline. So, for instance, one person turned up at Reading to do training, and so the Reading RE teachers at the Reading University is not running. So, having a national content or anything like that with clear, specific guidance, I can't see anything other than something good from it being a teacher, because people are going into areas where there is a definitive this is what you've got to do. And, it's nice to be able to go off base, go outside the box, but at the end of the day, it's a bit hard to train people to do that. And it takes years to develop skills to be able to bring kids back and all of that. And Stephen would know that, bringing kids back and talking about issues and keeping them on track and talking about things in a positive way. People have got to experience that. And if they've got some clear guidance, and that would also give impetus, I think, to the head teachers to get their acts sorted.
I mean, that one of the things there is this discussion around being national curriculum will then ensure, because the academy, the education at the moment will ensure that all academies have to teach national curriculum. If it became national curriculum, that would then flag up to the academies that they would be having to teach it. And if there's a national content standard, it would indicate then that there had to be RE of a certain quality. So where schools are, and we do know this happens in the case, doing RE in a form period for 20 minutes a day, rather than over time, as is mentioned by Deep and Meaningful, that will then focus the minds on where RE is going to go. But just, and I'll just with the comment at Reading, at a university in the northwest of England, two colleagues were made redundant by email from their RE PGC because of lack of numbers. It went down from 3 to 1. And they literally got an email on a train saying, sorry, we're closing the department, there'll be one of us left. It hopefully will give more emphasis to training. Also within the primary phase, because what we're finding is actually in the primary phase, primary RE trainees doing a PGC are getting a maximum of 3 hours of RE, if any, during their year's training. So the idea is it really will give impetus on all areas of the curriculum and moving forward in terms of RE.
Yeah, and I was really pleased to hear that, the ministers at senior level, they are pushing for RE. I always felt over the years, and this is again successive governments as well, that RE is regarded as a lesser of important subject than other subjects. Maybe it's just, RE is a religious education, but I see this is much, much bigger than that. It's developing the holistic personality of the child, which includes all the mention about integration, respect, and, being a more effective member of as a citizen as a whole. And some of the things they're actually taught helps them in the corporate and the work environment as well, because, so I think I'm really pleased to hear that. But also it's linked with that what Sarah was saying, is that because of this lesser important, vibe given by the centre, schools, I think, there's not important for them to push this forward as well. And there's lack of interest, and also the quality of the teachers we don't get who are properly qualified to actually teach RE as well. So these are all things are linked in a sense. And obviously because that's why you mentioned about the grade, Emily, because if they're not proper qualified teachers like you have for history and English and maths, then obviously that's going to impact on the results as well. So all these things are linked, but I'm pleased that actually, it's being pushed, and hopefully it won't be a temporary thing. It will be something in the long run as well. Because otherwise we have these personality issues come in, yes, it's important, and the next ministers come in, it's not that important, right? Other English and maths are more important. But actually the skills and the knowledge it develops, I feel strongly that actually that will help them to actually in their whole life as well. It's not just about, GCSEs and A-levels.
Thank you. Are there any other updates you'd like to share, Ian, or just draw our attention to? No? Okay. And then item 8, feedback from the Sacre conference.
Yeah, I was meant to be in this one, however, I wasn't unable to go for personal reasons. So one of my colleagues has mentioned that one, and I do know that Shirley also went to the Sacre conference. Lord Khan spoke about the importance of RE, and he really, as I say, is one of the pushing forward. I might think about it because he had a really good RE teacher, but I might say that one time. Back to all his family as well, so that's quite interesting. But the idea is he's really keen on that one, and the idea of ensuring that Sacres are still involved in that one. He really is wedded to the idea of Sacres. Just a very bit background to Lord Khan's background. Lord Khan was there at school in Burnley when we had the race riots. And so therefore he saw the lack of integration that the local authority had, and actually on the back of that one, to teach about many years, we had a Building Schools for the Future programme that I ran to ensure that we could bring the faith groups together. It was a very polarised society, so he really is keen on how important Sacre is. He also mentioned then the idea of actually moving away from the idea of isolation, of bringing faith groups together and giving that chance for dialogue to learn about each other. But that includes people with no religious faith as well, so the non-religious worldviews, ensuring that everybody is part of that work as well. Joyce Miller talked then about the idea of identity in RE, and the idea actually of ensuring that people are aware, of the different identities, what identity actually is. We've done a lot of work in school, and Emily's spoke about that one around the idea of equalities and the different groups, and ensuring people understand the different groups and hear I always call it the authentic voice of the groups, and that's a really key point that's being pushed in RE, and Sacre was talking about this one of bringing those areas together, that we hear what they say.
I was going to say, if you don't know much about PSHE or citizenship, which is the big things in schools at the moment, identity is very, very important. It's one of the key British values, so that would be a big, important thing to a lot of ministers as well as educationists as well at the same time.
Yeah, one of the things that is really clear there is around the idea of getting everybody involved in RE, and the idea is actually, therefore, some of the things that's been mentioned is the right of withdrawal. Investigating what the right of withdrawal is and how it's used is also really clearly coming through at the moment. Actually, why are people being withdrawn, and some of the rationale for it, because actually, therefore, they're not hearing other people. It's becoming quite I won't say polarised, but a very insular view of what RE is about, and actually ensuring that everybody's part of that.
But it's not just withdrawal in RE, but it's also PSHE, for instance. They have the right to do that, so.
I mean, as I say, a lot of what was being said was around the idea of the race riots in 2000, how RE can be used to bring communities together in disparate areas as well, and actually ensuring that, and that is the key bit about why now Sacre are very involved, that you come together as different faith groups and teachers to discuss these issues to get that information over to children as well.
Shira, you attended. Is there anything you'd like to share with members?
I'm just curious about the identity sort of exploration there. Is there anyone working at all on sort of positive British identity that can bind people together? Is there even a conversation about it? Because I listened to Joyce Miller's talk, and I have to say I was just kind of surprised that she spoke about these sort of nothings who have no identity. And then I thought of Catherine Birbalsingh and what she's doing at Michaela in terms of giving kids a sense of pride of being British. And I was kind of surprised that no one talks about that, and kind of disappointed because that, I don't think you're going to build a common identity by discussing the meaning of life, because you're probably not going to agree. That was the sort of one thing that came out of that, which is just a bit of disappointment from me. There's something sort of me missed, that so kids who sort of aren't from sort of minority ethnic groups and don't identify as Christians just end up sort of not belonging in any way at all, and then they get possibly led to sort of extremist identities, which isn't very helpful. They need something positive, and I don't think you get that from exploring your personal worldview. I don't think that really solves anything. But the other thing is that there were seminars sort of online after Sacre, which were very, very interesting because they were exploring sort of how to deal with controversial issues. The most interesting one I went to was from the what's it called, Faith and Belief Forum, and they have a lot of resources about how to encourage children in classrooms to learn how to have discussions rather than debates about important issues, which really made me think of Jonathan Sacks and the Dignity of Difference, where he talks about that, because that is what you have to do in RE. You shouldn't be debating who's right. You should be discussing and learning and empathizing and understanding. So there's some very interesting resources that they have. I don't think I've looked at. They don't come to Wokingham for they're sort of based more in London, but they've got some very interesting resources on their websites, which could be explored in my mind. That sort of activity, I guess it could fit either in RE or in PSHE. It's a sort of mixture, but in my mind, that's possibly more useful than debating whether there's evidence for the existence of God, which to me is kind of pointless.
Thank you. Ian and Shira, is there any questions or comments around? No? Okay. Okay, so item 9 on the agenda, Shinfield St Mary's School Spiritual Arts Competition. This is being deferred to... Yep, Sam's not here, so we're deferring that to the autumn meeting. I'm going to just change the order slightly. I'm just going to item 11 first. So the date of the next meeting is the 17th of November 2025. If there are any concerns with that, then please do share with Luciani and Emily. If it does clash or anything.
I'm just thinking, Stephen, that we should probably try and set a date for our spring meeting pretty soon. And I think we usually try and meet the second Monday after a half term, which I think would make our spring meeting Monday the 2nd of March. I don't know if that date is a good one for people.
Does the council diary give us space to do that?
I don't know, Luciana, you've got access to that, haven't you?
There is the Community Corporate Audience Scrutiny Committee. I don't know if any of the councillors are members of that committee.
Community corporate, 7th March. That's
Sorry, Sharon.
that's sorry. Oh, that's good. So that's good, yeah.
Okay, so we need to think again about... Shall I liaise with Luciani and then send out a tentative date to people?
And can I just ask, is the next meeting online or in person?
Is this room available, Luciani? Do you have to check?
I was going to say, if we've got new people joining, it might be worth having the first one definitely in person.
I mean, I always prefer...
I think in person, if we can, is always better.
We're just checking those of you online, just checking that this room's free for potentially... It'll be a hybrid meeting in person. Yeah. Okay, so Luciani will confirm, but I think it will be an in-person meeting on the 17th of November with hybrid options for those that need to join online. Any other business? I'm just mindful there's one piece I want to do off YouTube. If you've got any others that you want to...
I've got one other,
okay.
well, two actually.
Can we keep those?
One was just to mention that obviously Julie Easton isn't here tonight, but she has let us know that she's decided to stand down from the Sacre after the end of this academic year, which is a shame. She's been a really valued Sacre member who's given a lot. But yeah, so we're going to have a few vacancies to fill going forward, which I'll work with.
Can we minutes?
Yes.
Sorry, Sharon. Can we minute our thanks to Julie and just all of her contributions to Sacre? And I'll just echo what Emily was saying on behalf of everyone. We just thank her for her time and all the valuable contributions she's made. I think she'll be a loss.
And my other one is to do with the fact that you're leaving, Stephen, which we could do off YouTube after we've talked about the item you want to do, or we could do it now. I don't know which you would prefer.
I think the last one's quite important. I don't want to distract from that. So.
Okay. So obviously we wanted to mark the fact that this is your last meeting. And I believe you've been our chair for 10 years. I was looking back at the records. So I was having a look back at our annual reports to see some things that the Sacre's achieved in all that time. And some of the things I found was, I think since you've been chair, we've had 2 syllabus reviews, yeah? As you said, you were around at the beginning of the hub, so you've sort of supported the development of the hub and spent a lot of time going to hub meetings and communicating about the hub. We've had projects like the Crossing the Bridges project that gave a lot of support for schools in terms of visiting places of worship. We've had the Real People, Real Faith project. I was remembering that in 2021 in the autumn we had a little festival of RE because we had some spare funds. We put on a whole programme of training for Wokingham teachers, and every school got a free resource. And you've led us through the pandemic, of course, when we first started meeting online, and it seems weird now to think we never met online before then, but that was a really interesting time to lead us through. But I think in addition to those sort of very tangible things that have given a lot of support to Sacres and to teachers and schools, you've just been a wonderful presence to have as our chair. And I was looking at, people have written some messages for you for a card, and the same people are talking about your qualities, and I wasn't surprised in what anyone wrote, and the same kinds of things are being mentioned by different people. And it's things like your passion and your care about the teaching of RE, the sort of knowledge and wisdom that you bring to the role, the fact that you're so calm and measured and thoughtful and patient, and you're very friendly and approachable. And another thing that I would note is you're always very positive and celebratory of what our Sacre has achieved, and very grateful for everybody's time and the qualities that all the Sacre members bring, as well as being grateful to schools and the local authority for the support you get, and our clerks. So you've just been a really wonderful presence, and we're going to miss you a lot, and thank you so much for all that you've done. And we do have a few gifts and a card for you, which everyone has contributed to.
Oh, you guys really didn't have to. It's really kind of you. And I get really awkward with things like this, so I just want to say thank you. And yeah, this is very unexpected, and yeah, really kind of everyone. It feels a bit like an end of an era. So I started in Wokingham as an NQT in 2008. And then joined Sacre in 2009, I think. So I've been part of the Wokingham family, I think, for 17 years in one way or the other. So, yeah, I'm sad to sort of be going, but I think the time's right. I think you're all amazing, wonderful. I don't want to make this an Oscar speech, but because I'm just mindful of everyone's time. I think Wokingham Sacre is phenomenal. It's been a challenging year at times, but I think we've got through it. I think everyone cares so deeply about the young people and where they come from, and it's just been the honour of my life to be here as the chair of Wokingham Sacre, and I wish you all the best in the future, and I'm sure I'll hear and speak to all of you at some point, and via Beth, because we'll still be working together. And just a couple of quick sort of personal thanks. I want to thank Emily for sort of all the care, support, dedication over the years that we've worked together. Lucy Annie's had very big shoes to fill, and we had Anne Coffey, who was a phenomenal clerk, and I think you've done an amazing job, and I appreciate that. And just Beth as sort of vice chair, just being there with the phone and everything. So yeah, I'm going to stop now.
I think you should show people what you've got.
Okay.
Because they've no idea.
Should we stop the recording for that bit? I don't think you should need to see.